Krueg Show, everybody. Back with you, Larry Krueger. Jake Hutchinson joins us today from KNBR.com. You know, we're about a week and a half out from the draft, but Jake does an incredible job at KNBR.com. Kind of breaking down the Niners, covering the Warriors, covering all the teams, really, but did an incredible post-draft recap. So we want to have him on to break it all down. We'll give the band a day off there, and we welcome in Jake Hutchinson. Hey, Jake, what's going on, man? How are you?
Not much. I'm good. Just got back from that Warriors stinker last night, but, they pulled it out. So, interesting, terrible, everything in between, but it's all good. All good.
You didn't get hit with any of the rocks being thrown back and forth, huh? That was a true rock fight last night.
Yeah, seriously. That was ugly. I mean, at least Warriors fan got, Dylan Brooks just chucking brick after brick. So that was fun at least.
Well, we already have people in the chat. JHutch91 is a guy named Josh Hutchinson who's now listening to Jake Hutchinson. He's like, "What's up, fellow Hutchinson?"
What's going on, man? What's going on, man? Yeah, I had when Aiden Hutchinson got drafted, I've got a cousin named Aiden, so I got a lot of that.
Oh, do you? Yeah. Oh, that's good. Well, let's get right into the 49ers before I lead you in any direction. What was your just general takeaway from the Niner draft a week ago or so?
Yeah, like meh. It wasn't. I think Drake Jackson was a pretty straightforward slam dunk pick. It felt like good value there. Like he was probably expected to go a little earlier. Can't really mess that one up. I thought they reached a little bit with the running back. I thought they could have got better value there. And then the rest of it was kind of just at least they addressed the offensive line. My main concern is that they didn't touch safety. And the other concern was center. But, I like that they got Donovan West and Jason Poe as undrafted free agents. So that eased that a little bit. Still a little concerned about safety. But overall, I think it was fine. Even though they did reach on that running back a little bit, they still needed one. So it was okay. It wasn't anything where I was like, wow, they killed it. It was, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, I think to me, it's always a we'll see, right? Because it's like, you look at past drafts, some of these draft guides will be like, let's look at the draft 3 years ago. And then you're like, wow, man, there were some really bad picks or guys that you thought were going to be good. 3 years later, you look up and you're like, wow, that guy is nothing. Then you look at somebody who's drafted 3 picks later and you're like, that guy's a perennial all pro. So it's a crapshoot for sure. Let's talk about safety, though, because I think it's kind of interesting. They have Jimmy Ward. They have Hufanga. They signed George Odom away from the Colts. Shanahan was talking up Tarvarius Moore. God only knows why. And then you've got Dante Johnson, who, I don't know. I mean, to me, I think Dante Johnson could kind of, in a pinch at least, or for a few games, can play a safety role if they had to have him. I've actually heard people say Tariq Castro-Fields might be a future safety. But the two guys I wanted to ask you about was one guy, neither they drafted, but both of them they picked up after the draft. And I saw there was a thing about Senior Bowl. The Senior Bowl tight ends and running backs said that the safety that they thought was the most impressive during Senior Bowl week was Leon O'Neal from A&M. A lot of people feel like he's kind of stiff and not sure if he's going to be a coverage player, if he's a linebacker, if he's a box safety. But Leon O'Neal was pretty good at A&M. And then Taylor Hawkins was a really good player for San Diego State. San Diego State had a tremendous defense. Hawkins played a little corner, but he's kind of bigger, so maybe they're projecting him inside. To me, I'm interested to see, in camp, what Leon O'Neal and Taylor Hawkins look like. And if those guys can't play, is George Odom ready to be a full-time starter at safety? If not, maybe there's another move coming at that position.
Yeah, I think the way they're approaching it right now is just bring in as many bodies as they can and see if anyone can fill that void. See how it goes in OTAs and training camp. I don't know what the deal is with Jaquiski Tartt because
do you think he's coming back or you think he's gone?
It seems like they bristled at that suggestion. I asked John Lynch about it, and he seemed to say, we'll support him wherever that is. Seemed to suggest that probably isn't with the 49ers. And then Shanahan was like, well, hold up, we're not going to count out Tartt because he's always played good football for us. So it seems like a suggestion that they're not really looking into that right now. They haven't talked to him. And maybe he expected a better market, but he's a guy where he's at an age where safety's brutal, right? Like if you don't get paid early in your career and you have injuries, the market's just not there. And then you become a guy like, any of these veterans where you kind of just have to wait it out and you get stuck with these 1 year, like $1 million deals that, it's a pretty brutal position physically, especially the way Tart plays it. Like, is it even worth playing on those deals if you're not getting the right value, or do you, hold out and wait till somebody gets desperate, a few weeks into the year and cuts you a bigger check? So I think the way the Niners are looking at it is Odom, Hufanga, Moore, not a super confidence-inspiring group. O'Neal is definitely intriguing. I'd like to see what he can do. Hawkins too. I think they're going to see what they have and try and see if they can find something. But man, it's a position that I don't think you should gamble with, especially if Tart's out there for relatively cheap, which he always seems to be. So if it was me and Tart's out there for $1 million, I'd just bring him back, because that's the only safety pairing they've had that's really worked for them. And it's a position where that's why they had terrible corner play and could survive, because their safety play was so good. So I'll be interested to see what happens there. But for now, it feels like they're just trying to see if they can find any money where they already have it.
We have people already weighing in the chat. Niner Dad 21. What's up, Larry? And then we've got this one from Spinic Danger. He says, "Go Jake, go Jake," with the flex and the fire. One thing that I think is kind of interesting, Jake, that was taken care of is the Niners are tremendous. And I didn't realize this when I was watching the draft. I really didn't catch it until really after the draft. But they're pretty stacked now on the corner. I mean, look, you think most teams have what we've talked about it in the press box, during the regular season. Most teams have like 5 corners, maybe 6. Let's count it down for the Niners. They have Ambry Thomas. They have Charvarius Ward, who they signed as free agency. That was their big free agent signing. They got Emmanuel Mosley coming back. That's 3. Diamador Lenore was their pick last year. He'll be in camp this year. That's 4. They drafted Samuel Womack out of Toledo. That's 5. They still have Darqueze Dennard, who, whatever he's going to be. But you re-signed Jason Ferret. A lot of people think that the Penn State kid has got potential. Tariq Castro Fields, that's 8. I really love the guy they got after the draft, Quantrez Knight from UCLA. He's not fast, but he was maybe the best player in that secondary for the Bruins. I mean, that's 9 corners right there that they're going to camp with. Jake, they haven't had this kind of depth on the corner in quite a while, and all those guys that I named, in my opinion, can all play in the NFL. So there's no, there's other guys though, on this list. Kadar Hallman is in camp as well. But I mean, they're pretty. If you got 9 corners that you feel decent about going into camp, I think they're fortified there. That's the first time I can remember them being this deep at that spot.
Yeah, it's funny. It felt like their whole offseason was whiplash, from last year where, they watched Josh Norman and they were so desperate to find a corner and they just couldn't. And they're like, all right, we're not dealing with that again. And then they watched some of their special teams woes and they just spent all this money on special teams. And, they had some trouble, some injuries and stuff on the offensive line and not knowing exactly if McGlinchey's going to get back to where he was. And they're like, all right, we're just going to add a bunch of offensive linemen, figure out what position they play later, just get athletic guys. And it's so from that aspect, it is nice to see them at least proactively looking at stuff that they had last year that were problems and really trying to just bring in as much depth as possible and at least have bodies that look capable. And, maybe you're probably going to end up with a few guys that are surprise cuts, like Lenore's probably, at this point, just on the outside looking in, given the fact that they seem to like Womack. You're going to have some competition for that nickel spot. It's pretty much wide open. So, yeah, there's a lot that they're going to have to look at. And I like that they're being proactive with, addressing some issues from last year.
Let's talk about Womack and Tariq Castro Fields. Fields is like 6'1", 195 and ran 4th in the 4.3s. That's intriguing. And then you mix in the fact that he went to Penn State. He looked good at the Senior Bowl and the practices, and suddenly that looks like a really exciting late day 3 pick. And then Samuel Womack, I'll be fully, full disclosure. When I heard the name announced, I thought, who's that? Who's Samuel Womack?
No idea.
And then I went to the draft guide, and then I realized, the draft guide people didn't know who he was either. Right. they took him in the 5th round. He was listed as an undrafted free agent. Then you start going into some of the measurables, runs in the 4.3s. The road scout was pounding the table for him. He went from a walk-on at Toledo to a 2-time captain all-conference player. Then I heard the interview, and the guy's cocky and confident. He's like, man, I'm a shutdown press man corner, and I can't be beat. It's like he's really got that confidence that you're always looking for in the corner. But you actually attached some highlights and looked at the film of all these guys. What'd you think of Womack? What'd you think of Castro Fields?
Yeah, Womack was definitely the hardest guy to find tape on of anyone. But like you do see, he's basically K'Wan Williams, just young. Like he's in that same frame, and he's a guy that they pretty much explicitly said, like, yeah, we want him. It's gonna be an open competition, but their expectation, I think, is that he will win that starting nickel job. Otherwise, they wouldn't have spent that pick on him, especially before Castro Fields, who, if you switch the picks, it almost makes more sense. Like Castro Fields going in the 5th and Womack going, where Castro Fields went at 221. But Womack is a guy, he's got speed. He looks like he can play nickel, like he's got the frame, is a proactive tackler. Now, I don't know why if there's a requirement that you have to be a small guy to play nickel. And I guess sometimes it just has to do with footwork, flexibility, and speed in that little sort of box. But I'll be interested to see. Clearly, he's a guy that has a chip on his shoulder. The fact that he was a walk-on and then became this crucial player for Toledo. So he's really intriguing. And then Castro Fields is a guy that, like, I know it's like an old scout thing. You go back to like Moneyball where they're like, he's got the face, but he looks like an NFL corner. He does have the look, and that shouldn't, be a factor. But like, you see some tape and you're like, wow, like he looks really fluid at times. Played really well against Chris Olave. Like, was in the Big Ten for a while, has a lot of experience against really top tier NFL future wide receivers. So that's an encouraging thing. He's got length, he's got athleticism. He also, going back to, how the 49ers fouled so much earlier in the year and couldn't stop getting penalties. He didn't draw a lot of penalties. He's pretty safe with his hands. He's not super grabby, sort of fluid. Now, the thing with him is, like, he's sort of prone to disaster plays where double moves and stuff, he get cut off. It looked like, later in his career, he was overeager to make a play and make a name for himself, which you can sort of understand that. But if he can cut down on that and be a little bit more sound and just patient in coverage, I think he can be a really good NFL player. The other concern is tackling, but we'll see.
Portola 45 weighing in on the chat saying Womack probably the most ready out of all the draft picks. We'll find out.
I don't believe that you really know that, but I respect the take.
Exactly. Portola 45, much love, much respect. It's interesting. If you buy these NFL draft guides, okay, it's a magazine, right? And it comes out usually like late February, early March after the combine. So they usually have combine numbers, but 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks before the draft, sometimes 2 months before the draft. And it's just interesting how the whole draft picture, it's like if you get taken in the first round, you've got that stamp on you, Jake, for like the rest of life. You were a first round pick. And then if like Donovan West, the ASU center, he was an undrafted free agent. But then I go into my draft guide and when we've talked about Tariq Castro Fields, I thought of it. There were some draft guides that had Tariq Castro Fields in the 3rd round. There was one of the draft guys, I think the Athlon's draft guide said that 49ers pick at 61, which was their first pick in the draft that they used on Drake Jackson, was going to be Donovan West from ASU, the center. So it just kind of shows that there's any number of things that can ultimately affect your final draft status, and that there's not a huge difference between, let's say, a 2nd round pick or a 3rd round pick and a 5th round pick, or a 5th round pick and a 7th round pick, or a 6th round pick and an undrafted free agent. It's really beauty in the eye of the beholder. It all comes down to a workout number here, a measurement there, a scout's opinion here, a scout's opinion there. You know what I mean? We think of these guys as so definitive. Like if Niners had taken Donovan West in the 3rd round, there would be people going, you know what? Solid pick. And they had to go
Right.
center, and they had to go center early, and they couldn't wait around. Instead, they wound up getting Donovan West with $100,000 guarantee and a signing bonus, and as an undrafted player. And Castro Fields, another guy. A lot of people thought maybe going to be a day 2 pick, and they wound up late day 3 with Castro Fields. And now you're looking at him going, wow, can this guy make the team? And it's the same guy that was, a month ago projected as a 3rd-round pick. Let's switch to the offensive line, because I think that's if the secondary was like 1, maybe the O-line was 1A. Right. What did you think they got done on the O-line? They last year drafted Aaron Banks in the 2nd round. I think he was active. He was up, as they say, I think 2 games all year. I don't think he ever played. Right. Jalen Moore played an impressive preseason at left tackle, and then could not beat out a street free agent in Tom Compton for any playing time. When the coaching staff kind of told us they were going to split time going forward at some point in the middle part of the year. So we don't know what last year's draft really netted them in Banks and Moore. And now we've got 4 new players with the 2 they drafted and the 2 or 3 guys they drafted after. So they have like 5 to 7 new offensive linemen that really are kind of unproven. Where are you with what they have done on the O-line, not just this draft, but really the last 2 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was weird that Moore just fell out of the rotation completely. We never really got an answer, but Tom Compton seemed to play pretty well, at least in the run game, and then sort of, his pass sets were iffy, but he was a guard for most of his career and 32, 33 years old. So whatever he got out of him was impressive. Aaron Banks, the problem with that, even if he turns out to be great, it's something where I just keep going back to they could have got Creed Humphrey. And I can't get over that because Creed Humphrey
from Oklahoma went to Kansas City, right?
He's the Chiefs, like one of the best centers in the league at this point. After his rookie year, was just tremendous last year, and it is something where you could have stuck him at guard, and then if Alex Mack ends up retiring, you've already got a replacement center. We still don't know what the situation is with Alex Mack, so that'll be interesting. I will say that, like, if he doesn't return, J.C. Treader is still out on the market, so it's not a totally dire situation. But as far as what they did in the draft, I love Spencer Burford. He was, I think, the first ever 4-star recruit at UTSA, local San Antonio kid who just stuck around to help build the program up. Super athletic, super, super aggressive. You can see how he moves in the run game. Just there's quickness off the line, takes really good angles at people. And he was super self-critical after the draft when we talked to him. He said he's a little too aggressive sometimes, puts too much weight, I think, on his back foot. Obviously needs to work on his footwork and stuff and just, calm down a little bit. But it's something where, Chris Foerster is a great offensive line coach. You'd think they can iron that out. I like that a lot. I'm not sure about Zakelj. I don't mind it because it's just a bet on athleticism and a guy that can clearly move in his own scheme. But I almost think he might be a better fit at center than guard or tackle because I just don't know that he can anchor out there very well. But, it's a bet on athleticism and a guy who's got a sound head on his shoulders. So I'm not super enamored. I don't know that they've really got great value at guard yet, but they at least were proactive in adding depth. And especially like if Mike McGlinchey doesn't get back to where he is, I could see Burford, working as a potential tackle option out there.
That's interesting. I wasn't even thinking about McGlinchey's rehab from that quad tear, which sounded awful. Sounded painful as hell. So if you what's your best guess of like the ones on the O-line left to right? We know it's Trent Williams at left tackle. The rest of it was kind of an unknown, right? So let's go left guard, center, right guard, right tackle. We're like right now, if you're just guessing, because I'm not tying you to it, and the audience isn't either, and we're all just guessing. I mean, we still haven't seen rookie mini camp, veteran mini camp, training camp starts in the middle of July. It will all get worked out there. You already mentioned the Niner O-line coach is considered to be a top tier guy, so he's considered an outstanding teacher, and he's got a lot more depth to deal with. But what do you think if you had to guess left to right next to Trent? What are they going with? What's their quad?
Yeah, I would guess Banks at left guard.
That's where he played at Notre Dame, right?
Right. All indications are that they really like him. And one thing I'll say is it is something where if they're moving to Trey Lance, which it looks like they're moving to Trey Lance, I think we're all there. It's Lance's time. As long as he doesn't get injured or look horrendous in OTAs and training camp, it's his job. So it's something where maybe they want to change the identity of the offensive line a little bit, and they don't necessarily need all these, quick outside zone guys as much as they have in the past. And Banks certainly fits more of a, power gap sort of mold. And that's not to say he doesn't have the athleticism to run zone and all that stuff, but I have wondered sort of with the move to Lance if they want a different type of interior. So my guess is Banks. It's so tough to know if Alex Mack is returning. I felt confident that he wasn't going to return, and then the way Lynch was talking about it, it's definitely murky.
How do you think he played, Jake? Because personally, I thought he really struggled at somewhere in the early part of the year. I'd say week 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there.
I'll say it. He was terrible. He was terrible early on. He was getting whooped. I have clips.
And you asked Shanahan at one of those pressers about him. I remember you asking about him. But then it kind of picked up.
And then he was fine.
Yeah, he I thought there was towards the end of the year, I thought he was playing at a pretty high level. So I don't know what to expect. To me, if you said to me, does he have more football left or is he done? I would say he has more football left.
I agree. And it's funny. It felt like he had, he's an older guy, he had some scar tissue to he had to warm up the old knees, took him a third of the season to get it going. And then he did. And then he looked great and we weren't talking about him. But he did struggle early. And I wonder not so much if he can't get into shape, but more just if he's listen, I've played so long. I've got, a family. I think he just went on a honeymoon, over the summer. So that's something where it's why don't I just do this all the time? Why don't I just sit at home and relax and not have to deal with football and everybody talking about my butt sweat at training camp, So it's
never good when they're talking about your butt sweat.
I know. I hate when people talk about my butt sweat. But it's something where, if I was him, I'd definitely consider it. He's a super smart guy, loves to cook, loves to do a bunch of other stuff. So, I think he's going to take all the time he needs to make the decision because, if you're him, I believe he's 35, 36 now. There's no, you've played a lot of football. You've achieved a lot, and it's a real question, I think, in his mind of are we going to compete for a championship? Is it worth it for me to put my body out there for another year, go through all of this? And so I don't know. I think if it's not him, J.C. Tretter is just the most logical option. And then probably Donovan West backing him up. Or maybe West shows out where you don't even need to sign Tretter and he just looks incredible and you've got that depth. So I would still lean slightly that it's still Mack. And then right guard, probably Brunskill, which is not super encouraging, but okay, right? He's
done well against Aaron Donald,
right? He's
at times.
That's so funny to me that he just stonewalls Aaron Donald some of the time. And then
what about McGlinchey? Where's McGlinchey in this mix? What are you hearing about his rehab? Was there anything said in any of the draft, post-draft, or discussion around the draft about McGlinchey's status and how he's rehabbing?
I think it's one of those things where, they're not going to detail exactly where he's at. I think they're cautiously optimistic. He's obviously put some tape and stuff out showing himself running around. And listen, everybody loves Mike. Great dude, great run blocker. But it is something where he's, 6'8" and he tore a quad. So even if everyone's saying he looks great, we have high expectations, it's something where you got to see it. It's something where you have to see it in training camp every single day, show that he can do it. I think he said that he's not sure if he's going to be ready to go. I don't think he's going to participate in OTAs. His hope is that he's ready for training camp. So we'll see. He did seem pretty optimistic and positive, about his situation. So we'll see. And it's, you want to give a take. You want to say, hey, here's how I think it's going to go. But it's tough to tell when you haven't seen a guy out there in however month and however long. And it's quad tear. So some guys can recover from that and be totally fine. And then some guys, it's basically a career ender. So it's something where you really just have to see it out on the field and and see how his body holds up.
Ken Martin weighs in the chat. He says they've got a lot of versatile pieces on that offensive line. I think Ken's right on the money. It's funny. People will accuse me of being, obsessed with the esoteric as far as these undrafted guys. But I really think that part of the reason I like this draft is their draft haul after the draft. Now, we mentioned Burford from UTSA, and he blocked for this running back Sincere McCormick, and they had a tremendous O-line. And then Zakel or Zakelj, how you pronounce it, from Fordham. Fordham had a good offense this year, and this guy was the two-time captain. But then they went and got 3 guys after the draft: Donovan West from ASU, and they guaranteed him. They gave him a signing bonus, and I think they gave him like $100,000 guaranteed to kind of get him away from other teams. A buddy of mine who looks at the Big Ten said that the Minnesota left tackle Schluter is actually a decent player. And then there's been a lot of buzz about Jason Poe from Mercer.
Oh, yeah.
And I think Pro Football Focus or somebody wrote that Poe is not just the Niners' best undrafted free agent signing, but that he might be one of the best undrafted free agent signings in the entire league. And he's a short guy who looks like he's athletic enough to play fullback. But they like him as a center. And anyway, if you go to Niners Nation right now, they have an article up about the Niners hits in the undrafted market. I mean, think about this. The Niners in the undrafted free agent market have landed Emmanuel Mosley, Azeez Al-Shaair, Jeff Wilson, Kevin Givens, Kendrick Bourne, not to mention Nick Mullins, Raheem Mostert, and others. But they've hit a lot on these undrafted guys to the point where it almost makes you want to really research each and every one of them. I went down the rabbit hole on YouTube the other night of watching Jason Poe film.
Oh, yeah. He's awesome.
He's an awesome player to watch. Now, granted, he's playing at Mercer, so you got to factor that in. Anytime you're looking at a guy at a lower level, he should dominate. But when you watch this guy, he does. And he absolutely can stonewall you. He's got huge upper body strength. He just looks like a guy who's athletic at that size. He's short by NFL standards, but that doesn't preclude him from playing center or fullback or backup tight end. And he just really looks athletic. I see him catching the ball out of the backfield. What'd you think? I mean, West was kind of heralded. Schluter played in the Big Ten. Poe is the kind of no-name guy, but he's the intriguing guy in my mind.
And the thing is, you look at it and it's Mercer, but he played Alabama and he looked pretty darn good against Alabama.
Right. Yeah, he was good against Bama.
Right. And so that's something where you talk about really the only knock on him is that he played at Mercer and then he's short. Right. Like, because no one's watching his tape and like, I don't know about that guy. You see him play and you're like, that guy's a dude. He can play. And it doesn't matter where it is. Like he's like, he can play defensive tackle, like he's got that sort of strength. And it's something where I almost think the size is overblown because, at another point, it's like the low man always wins, right? That's the old adage where
it's a leverage game for sure.
And if you're a really, really athletic guy who can anchor, like who can deal with the size, it's going to be tough for guys to get around you because so much of what, like Arden Key succeeded on the interior a lot because there are all these sort of stone-footed centers where he's got length and speed to cut inside. Like Poe's a guy that he would absolutely be able to deal with that. He's got the speed and the quickness and the strength to anchor. And so I'm really, really intrigued to see how he does because I think he makes the roster. I don't know how it is, or maybe he's the last guy that off practice squad, but I just think he's so athletic and just so entertaining to watch. And maybe it doesn't translate, but I just think he has so much potential and just the way he gets after it. And you see the speed. Like I think he's probably the fastest guy on the offensive line. And that's talking about Trent Williams, who's crazy quick, and McGlinchey, you can get downfield. That guy can run. Like he can run like borderline like a running back, like Juszczyk. I'd like to see a race. So that is easily, but like by far the guy I'm most excited to see in training camp. I just think he could genuinely become a decade-long starter despite the height. I think he has that much potential. And again, it's an undrafted free agent, so there's always a chance like he just flames out of the league entirely. But I love potential.
GD5 says, I really like Jeremiah Gemmel, undersized linebacker, but a guy who's dynamic and always around the ball. The linebacker spot was probably the deepest spot on the team coming into the draft. They did not use any picks on draft guys. They signed Oren Burks in free agency. So you got Fred Warner, you got Greenlaw, you got Al Shire, you got Flanagan Foles, you got Oren Burks, Curtis Robinson, the former Stanford kid, still there. He's a really good special teamer. And then they went in the draft, and after the draft, and they signed Jeremiah Gemmel, and they gave him a decent guarantee as well. His nickname was the General at North Carolina, and he's a little bit sawed off. He's a little short, but man, very productive player. Made a lot of tackles. To me, those are three really interesting names: Jeremiah Gemmel, the Segun Alubi linebacker from San Diego State. If you watch San Diego State, their defense was incredible. And Alubi runs 4.45. These linebackers are just getting faster and faster and faster. And Alubi weighs about 225 pounds. And then Marcelino McCrary Ball, his film is interesting. He's even smaller. He's about 6 feet. He's almost like a safety, 6 feet, 215 pounds. But another guy, great instincts, made a ton of tackles. What did you think of, or did you look at any of their undrafted linebackers? What do you think of that spot? I mean, they're probably as stacked at linebacker as almost any team in the league right now.
Yeah, it's something where Aziz and Dre Greenlaw, you're probably going to lose at least one of them, if not both, coming up next year, right? So it's something where I think going about it the undrafted route is probably smart, where you don't need to spend a pick right now. You can see how it plays out. You have enough depth as it is.
And Aziz was undrafted. So, you may find somebody.
Right. And this is something they did last year. They love to go for the guys that are veterans, right? That have been around for 5 years. They went for Ohio State, Justin Hilliard, and then Kansas's Elijah Sullivan, both of whom I think were 5-year guys. I think they lost Hilliard to the Giants.
Right.
I'm pretty
he went
sure.
to the Giants and stuck there all year, I think.
Right. And he looked really impressive. And they found the guy they traded to the Broncos, who I loved.
I forget his name.
I think he played at he
might have played it someplace.
I think he played at Illinois State or something.
That's it. That was it. Illinois State. Yep.
Yeah, I can't remember his name. But they traded him to the Broncos for a 6th-round pick. And he was an undrafted free agent who had no NFL experience. And that's insane that you can just trade an undrafted. So they've had a lot of success with undrafted free agent linebackers. So I haven't watched a ton of tape, but Gemmel looks long and was super productive at UNC, which is really improved as a program in recent years, just being competitive. And I like the take. He's a guy that's always around the ball. You see him taking really good angles. He's and he wraps up too. He's always making sure that even if he doesn't get the tackle, he's slowing down the ball carrier by being smart with the way he tackles. So I think they like guys like that have solid college production, solid speed, because in the NFL now, you can't be an old school linebacker with the neck roll and just running a 4.8. You got to be quick.
Yeah,
right. You got to cover ground.
Jake, I think it's even more pronounced than that. Evan Weaver, remember the Cal Bear linebacker who went to the Arizona Cardinals? He hasn't gotten on the field. He was a tremendous player in the Pac-12. Well, why? Because he's a 4.7 linebacker, and 4.7 linebackers, it's like there's a bell that goes off. If you run in the 4.7s and you're a linebacker, as soon as you're on the field, everybody's like, doot, 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 attack the 4.7 linebacker. Right. So you got to have 4.5 speed now. And heck, this guy Alubi runs 4.45, and I was watching. He's just electric. That's the one thing about the Niners linebackers. Every single one of them can run. And many of them are converted safeties. That seems like the way the league's going right now.
Yeah, one thing that I'll say about them is they're betting on athleticism, and one of the I think damning things of teams that fail in the draft overall is. They'll take guys that aren't athletes late. If you take a guy who's not an athlete late, then what are you doing? Just even if a guy his tape is shaky, if he's a mediocre athlete and has great college production, that's one thing. But if he's a subpar athlete and you're taking him late, I don't know what you're doing. You need to bet on athleticism, and the 49ers, especially in this draft, continue to bet on guys that are athletic. The league continues to get faster, and Obviously, you still need guys who can tackle, like Castro Fields had issues tackling, but it's something where that's where you kind of trust your coaches to teach better technique and teach them how to use their bodies in the correct way. And you just bet on guys that have, solid foundations that listen and take coaching and are athletes, because if you have guys that you can mold and you have good coaches, that's a really solid bet to make. If you have a guy who's not an athlete and he's got that dog in him, but he can't run, he might be a great team guy to have around, but if he can't outrun anyone, that's an issue. And then you have guys like Jawan Jennings who are like that and just somehow get open and are, incredible players despite being, subpar athletes. But I liked him too, because he's just a guy that you don't have an answer, but he always catches the ball.
What'd you think of Jackson? Drake Jackson was the number one pick. We've kind of buried the lead. And what is the status of D Ford? He's still on the roster, but they're not counting on him. Am I missing something here? What's going on with D Ford? Are they going to release him before camp? Is it a cap deal? Why is he still on the roster if they know he's not going to play?
Yeah, they restructured his deal again because it was cheaper than cutting him post June 1st even. That deal was something where it's misunderstood a little bit, because people they talk about, they've restructured his deal I think 4 times. And the reason they've had to do that is because the grave error they made was when they signed him, they had injury guarantees for 3-4 years into it and didn't worry about the back injury that nearly ended his career in Kansas City. Like there were concerns in Kansas City that D Ford wouldn't be able to walk again. That's what his doctor said. And they came back and played great. And then the 49ers were like, oh, a guy whose back is broken potentially? Yeah, we'll pay him all this money and guarantee it. So he's on the roster because it's cheaper to keep him and have him, probably on PUP or whatever than it was to cut him post June 1st. But I believe this is the last year of him. And it sucks because he's tried. He's tried so hard to get back, and he's a likable dude. And it's just such a brutal thing where it's a back injury that, he'll be fine after, he'll work back for 3-4 months, be fine. And then the next day it's back to, square one. So I just don't expect to see him again. It was like last year, you saw him and it was like he could play 1 game or 16, but it's probably closer to 1. And that's basically how it went. And so, yeah, I don't expect much of him. I like that they got Jackson early, because getting any guy who's an athlete, let alone one with some moves in his bag and college production, give Kasurek any guy like that, he's going to make something out of him as long as he's open to coaching, and it seems like he is.
It is such an interesting D line because they're so deep. I mean, they're so deep. I was talking about depth on the corner, but man, they're literally 4 lines deep on the defensive line going into camp. So they lose DJ Jones. They lost Kentavious Street. They lost Arden Key. And obviously now we're talking about D Ford moving on. They added Drake Jackson. They signed Hassan Ridgeway. They re-signed Kerry Hyder from 2 years ago. They drafted Kalia Davis. They signed Kimoko Ture. And after the draft, they picked up the kid from Fresno State, Kevin Atkins. So I'll just throw it to you. We're not going to know the definite answer till we see it on the field, but just your sense of it. Do you think the Niner D-line was better last year? Or do you think that the room is more talented this year?
I think talent-wise, bringing in Jackson elevates it because, they got so much production out of like Ibukam, who was terrible in the first half. And, Arden Key, I watched him in camp and he looked terrible. And that's a reminder to me. Every year I see a guy that looks terrible in camp and then he turns out to be great during the year. And I can't wrap my head around it. Like, at one point,
Ambry
I was like,
Thomas. How about Ambry Thomas? He was like, he looked like he had never played football before. And by the end of the year, he was their best corner.
And that's something where it's like you really do have to give the Niners credit for sticking with guys and just having a vision for what they can be. Because I'm telling you, I watched Arden Key and I thought he was the worst player on the team in training camp at one point. Like, he just didn't look like he knew what he was doing. And I think part of that was they were trying to see what he was capable of and see if he could switch roles. And they figured out he could rush from the inside and stunt inside, and it worked out tremendously. So they have a real ability to find skill sets that other teams either don't see or underutilize. And I think they have enough talent that it's going to be a really solid group. Like, you've got Nick Bosa. So, everything else is they continue to stack depth every year, and Maurice Hurst is back. He couldn't get healthy. So that's going to be interesting to see if he can actually play, because I think that's something where they look at that and say, if he can be healthy, like that can fill a lot of the void that DJ Jones leaves behind.
A couple last questions before we let you go. Wide receiver. What is the latest on Deebo Samuel? Where is it going with Deebo Samuel? Because he made the trade request, and there's all this so much conjecture. And were they going to trade him? Did they want to trade him? Did they not want to trade him? Now I think it's pretty clear they didn't want to trade him. But then the draft came and went, and now he still wants to be traded. Are they going to mend this fence and he's going to be here long term? Are they going to come to some kind of a compromise on all the different issues that they have? Or do you see him holding out, forcing a trade? Is this going to get ugly? I mean, before we talk about what they did at wide receiver, let's talk about Deebo, because he's the central figure in that room.
I don't know what leverage he really has. I think he misplayed his hand, and it's something where I think he might have had a chance if, right around free agency when Devontae Adams got traded and Tyreek Hill got traded, if they had made their move then and said, hey, we want out, and given the 49ers time where the 49ers could have prepared 2-3 months leading up to the draft, hey, if we're going to lose Deebo, we're going to really evaluate the rest of these wide receivers and, at least be open to a trade more than, like less than a month out, right? Where it felt like they just forgot to ask the 49ers where they were at and waited too late. And then Deebo got upset that, they didn't make him a formal offer, because it's something where the 49ers have done this with their stars, right? They wait till the end of the summer, right before training camp, and then they come to the table and they get a deal done, and they pay them a lot. They paid George Kittle. They paid Fred Warner. They paid Trent Williams. Like, they talk about it. They almost pay their guys too much. And it's something where Deebo didn't seem like he had the patience to deal with that. And, you wonder, is that just him understanding that this is his summer? Like, this is where he has to get a deal done, because things are so fleeting. Like, it's hard to believe that he's going to have a season like he had last year. That's not to say that he won't have another great season. He's a great wide receiver, and if he's healthy, he's going to be fantastic. But the value he had to the 49ers will never be higher than it was last year, because they're not going to use him as a running back as much as they did last year. If you switch to Trey Lance, you're not going to be leaning on all those short run after catch passes as much as they did last year. So it's something where I think Deebo overreacted, honestly, and he should get his money. Like, he knows what his worth is, and he definitely deserves a big deal. But I think he misunderstood the 49ers, just how the pace of negotiations works, where they probably are like, hey, we're going to take this slow. Like, we're probably going to come in, not put an official offer on the table, but, we'll give you a ballpark estimate probably. And, probably was 18, 19, 20 million, something lower than Deebo wants or probably deserves, right? And then Deebo didn't like that. And, we don't know for sure, but it's been confusing, because even John Lynch has said continually, whatever the issue is, whatever it is, like, John Lynch has indicated that the 49ers aren't totally clear on what Deebo's issue with them is, because they want to pay him. He wants to get paid. If he holds out, he loses his free agency eligibility. He gets fined $40,000 a day. So he can't really hold out. That's not really an option unless, he wants to lose even more leverage, or just, sit out until he gets paid. The other option is like a hold in, where you sort of have a phantom injury and just sort of mope around, and you're there, but you're not really there. You're kind of just hanging around, making things difficult until they pay you. So
will he try that? Do you think that will be one of his tactics? Because, I mean, this is my concern, is that anytime you've got a guy who's had a lot of soft tissue injuries, there's different levels of working out in the off season. And he's had some soft tissue injuries going back to South Carolina. It was pretty clear last year that he came to camp in great shape and ready to roll. To me, this player in shape and out of shape is two dramatically different players. And I want to make sure that he's working out full bore and that he's right mentally about where he's at. Because if he's not happy, that could mean he doesn't work out. If he doesn't work out, that means quad and hammy pulls, which means I'm paying him a good sum of money to, as you say, kind of get through the year, but not really play consistently.
Well, that's something that Kyle has explicitly said just about every summer since the 49ers have had him. Unprompted a lot of the time, where he said, the one thing coming out of college that I heard is he said that Deebo has a tendency to put on weight over the offseason. And that's not me criticizing him. That's what Kyle has said openly multiple times. Deebo has a tendency to put on weight over the offseason. And he said after the 2020 campaign, basically like, hey, man, I know this was frustrating, but that's like a reminder. You have to come in ready. You have to be prepared coming into the season. And coming into last year, Deebo had the most serious offseason of his entire career. He took it very seriously, was working out tirelessly, and he had an incredible year. Shanahan and everyone else know that if he's on the field and he's healthy, he's going to be an outstanding player. You know that. He loves to play. He's super physical. Like, there's a fire for the game when he's out there that like everyone feeds off of, and it's just deeply unique and incredibly impressive. And he's one of the most just like beautiful, aesthetically pleasing players to watch I've ever seen. Like, everyone loves to see this guy play, but it is something where he has had injuries in the past, and the only thing that'll hold him back is if he's not fully healthy, not fully committed. And so if you have any concern about that, are you really going to pay him $20 million a year? Are you really going to guarantee him all this money? It's something where you almost want to draw up a deal where if you have a healthy year, the next year is guaranteed. If you play a certain amount of games, next year is guaranteed. But obviously Deebo and his team are going to be like, no, that's not how this works. And so it's something where I think the 49ers are going to be more willing to be, I think they're going to be willing to be more stubborn than he is. They've proven that they will sit in uncomfortable situations. They don't really care. Kyle is as stubborn as they come. And he said it. He's like, I love Deebo, but at the end of the day, my loyalty is to the organization, and I'm going to do what's best for the organization. And if Deebo continues to go down this path of threatening a trade that's never going to happen, he might be in trouble, because the 49ers might just say, listen, man, we love you, but if you're going to be like this, then we're not going to pay you $20 million right now. We'll let you play on that $4 million deal, or give you a 1-year pay raise, and then we're going to tag you, because we can't trust you to negotiate in fairly. So that's something that I think they want to pay him. I think they want to give him a deal, but he's making it very difficult to, and he's not giving them a lot of explanations as to why.
Do you look at Danny Gray and Ray McLeod, Jake, as guys that are there to complement Deebo, or do you look at those guys as potentially guys to replace Deebo if they ultimately have to move him? And what did you think of those two additions? Both those guys can move pretty well, and definitely the wide receiver position's more dynamic, let's say, than it was at the end of last year.
Yeah, I think McLeod was just a guy that they liked special teams wise and has athleticism. Like, he had a decent amount of catches for the Steelers too. Was pretty involved, and is like a guy that you can see run after the catch. Main issue is he's fumbled way too much.
Yeah, saw that like 6 times or something like that, wasn't it? It was a lot.
Yeah, it's a really untenable amount, so you have to get that sorted out, figure out that ball security. But he's a guy that has athleticism, is a really good returner, and is something where I don't think they want to use Deebo as a kick returner. I don't know if they loved what they saw from Ayuk. So, I think it's something that McLeod provides them a lot of value. And Gray is just a guy where you're moving to a Trey Lance offense where you want to throw the ball deep. And Gray, if nothing else, is a guy that can run fast in a straight line. And one of the most frustrating things about trying to watch his tape is that their quarterback at SMU couldn't throw the ball more than like 20, 30 yards.
Oh, I know. So it was embarrassing.
You see Gray
Mordecai or whatever his name was.
Oh, yeah, it was horrendous. And I don't want to trash on a college guy, but I'm going to, because he was terrible. It was like
he couldn't get deep to his deep threat.
Right. They were just having him run 9 routes up the field, and the quarterback is noodle arming the ball 25 yards down the field, and he's having to come back to it. And so it's hard to evaluate him. But I think with and he had some issues with drops, which is a concern, but Deebo also does too. And I think it's something where there's a certain element of drops being overvalued, where teams are like, listen, like everyone's going to drop the ball. Eventually you'll improve. We got to just bet on athleticism. And Gray is an absolute speedster. You see him with the ball in his hands, and it's one of those yak guys where if you get him on any chance to run and, cut across diagonally across the field with the ball in his hands, it can be a problem. Now his size, he needs to put on a little bit of weight. I don't know if it's so much as, compensating if Deebo doesn't play as much as it is. I think the 49ers, there's an evolution of the offense and taking shots downfield. And I think, he's a real swing for the fences. He could be a guy that flames out of the league. Like, I genuinely think that's possible. He could be Marquise Goodwin, or he could be an absolute diamond. I think it's a total wide range of options for him, and I'm interested to see what he does.
Yeah, Niner Dad 21 says, in a word, burner. Yeah, there's no question. Yep. I mean, Danny Gray, it's funny too, because Lynch made the point, or I think it was Lynch, maybe it was somebody else, made the point that there's a lot of guys, especially this year, that ran in the 4.3s. But then you turn on the film and you don't necessarily always see that speed. With Gray, he almost is faster than that time. Like that, you watch his film, and then you'd say, "Oh man, this guy's like Tyreek Hill. This guy's a 4.29 or whatever." And then you see 4.33, and you say, "You know what? I don't know. He might be even faster than 4.33." But that's what he ran for the stopwatch. Now, two guys that got after the draft. One of my buddies in the league called me the 2 days after the draft and was like, "Man, 49ers got two of the best undrafted receivers in the entire bunch." And Tayseer Mack, who was the deep threat for Kenny Pickett at Pitt. And then Tay Martin. And my buddy's like, "Yeah, that's big play Tay, who started at Wazoo, thought Pac-12 football wasn't going to play. Because of that, he transferred to Oak State. And then by the end of the year at Oak State, man, he was like the best player on the team. He was awesome in the Big 12 title game. He had 3 touchdowns on 100 yards against Notre Dame in the bowl game. He was awesome in the Cheez-It Bowl the year prior. Big play Tay Martin, 6'3", 185 pounds, definitely weak as far as he didn't even do any of the lifting because I don't think he really is strong on the bench press. But he's got good size, and he plucks the ball with his hands, and he makes big plays. I'm really eager to see Tay Martin and Tayseer Mack in camp. And, we'll know right away. I mean, can they separate is the question, but they also have got ball skills. And I think as they're transitioning from Garoppolo, who threw kind of an easy to catch ball, and Trey Lance, who throws kind of a bullet, you're going to need guys and prioritize guys who can really pluck it with their hands. And both those guys can. What'd you think when you watched him? What have you heard about him?
Yeah, Martin is interesting because he's obviously got the college production, and he didn't test crazy well in any aspect except for his 10-yard split, which is it kind of shows up on tape. Like he's quick off the line, has had some drops, but it kind of reminded me not in the same sort of mold, but with Juwan Jennings, where it's something where they're not this crazy athlete, but they have an ability to separate. They're a little slippery. They just have a knack. And there's guys where I think at the receiver position, you like to bet on guys that sometimes you can't explain it. Sometimes you can't explain it with, I don't know why this is working for this guy. I don't exactly know why, but it's working. It keeps working. And I might not have the best explanation for it, but I see it time and time again where he's creating enough space, is flexible with his body and attacks the ball where you just bet on those guys and you bring them into camp. Like Jennings, again, tested terribly athletically, but he was a guy that at Tennessee, he just kept showing up time and time again. And he's not quick. He doesn't have this crazy ability, but it's almost like a power forward who knows how to get into the post and back guys down and, move around and create just that inch of space that they need, especially, when you have length. And I think Martin is a guy that has a little slipperiness to him that I'm excited to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a track meet; it's a football game. So you need football skills.
Right?
And do you need athleticism? Yeah, and there is a prerequisite. Are you fast enough? Who knows? We may show up in Santa Clara this summer, take one look at Tay Martin and Tayseer Mack, and just say, nope, draw a line through them, not fast enough, can't separate, can't play. But we'll see. We'll see, because both those guys were enormously productive in college. All right, let's finish up with the quarterbacks and the running backs. Deebo and its relation to Jimmy, I want to get your thought on that. So we can't see anything really happen with Deebo or with Bosa as far as contract extensions until Garoppolo gets moved, correct?
It might work out that way. I think they'll have to clear space. Like, if they need to create money for Deebo, they can do it with Jimmy Ward if they need to. Like, Jimmy Ward, I think, has like a $10 million cap hit or something, where if they extend him another year, they can clear, $5+ million, where Deebo year one, he'd be getting a raise of something like $5 million. It wouldn't go straight up to 20. That's usually how it works, is year one, you get a $5 to $8 million bump, something like that, and then it increases substantially the year after. So they could create space that way. Bosa, I don't even know if they get a deal done this summer. They already exercised the 5th-year option. I think they know that, and Bosa's camp knows that he's going to get his money, and so that's not even a concern of when. They know that's going to happen, so there's no real rush with that. But yeah, Deebo, I mean, I don't know if it's reliant on getting rid of Jimmy to get that deal done, but it certainly would make it easier if you want to sweeten it, and say, you know what, we're going to give you 10 extra million this year because we can. We're going to give you a bump from 4 to 15, which is, something teams don't usually do with the structure of these deals. But if Deebo's, being stubborn and you just want to do a good faith sort of thing, then yeah, like waiting till Jimmy's off the books would definitely ease that. If that happens, I don't know, because I keep going back to like Seattle. You'd imagine Seattle would take a shot at Jimmy. That's a veteran quarterback that they know that you got to think Pete Carroll would say, Jimmy Garoppolo for free? Yes. So I wonder how much of this is the 49ers saying, okay, let's wait till Jimmy's healthy, see if we can deal him to the Panthers, or will they just be stubborn enough to keep him around and say, we'd rather pay Jimmy $25 million to sit on our bench than let him go to Seattle for free. And I do just wonder how much of that plays into it. And maybe it's not at all. Maybe that's not even on their mind. But I have to imagine that's a little bit of the calculation, not letting him go to a division rival and at least annoy them for a year.
Well, I mean, it could be a disaster for John Lynch. I mean, think about it. You can't trade him. You said you had the second-round pick offer. You didn't get that pick. He then has the back surgery. You got to wait. You can't really participate in free agency full bore because you didn't have the cap room. You can't really extend Deebo or Bosa because you don't have the cap room. Maybe they can get around that, as you've kind of referenced.
Right. But they have to get tricky. They have to get clever with it.
But what if this guy, I mean, Pete Carroll said 3 times this week, hey, we're not looking to trade for a quarterback. But how many times have the Niners taken Seattle guys or Seattle taken Niner guys, from Michael Robinson to, you name it, Michael Wilhoit to everybody, DJ Reed. Every time a guy gets cut here, they have interest. Every time it seems like they're moving on from a guy, the Niners may have interest. It's this incestual division thing. I think Pete's sitting there going, you know what? Let's leave this spot open. We like Drew Lock. But if Jimmy shakes free, damn right, he's going to wind up there. Right. And if you're John Lynch and let's just paint this scenario. You're forced to cut Jimmy Garoppolo at the beginning of camp. He goes to Seattle. Seattle sweeps you this year with Jimmy, and Trey stumbles in his first year. You're potentially gone at the end of the year because of that.
Right, that's a nightmare situation.
Am I overstating that? Do you think that's possible?
I wouldn't think Lynch would go because of that, and I think the Niners will probably be competitive. But if the season is a disaster and Jimmy has success with Seattle, then I don't think that's an outrageous thought. I don't think that's likely to happen, but it is something where you have to really consider that Seattle right now is kind of a joke, even though their draft was pretty good, right?
Yeah, they had a good draft.
Their draft was solid. They got some tackles. But right now, they're not a threat. No one's looking at Seattle like, oh, Seattle is still competitive. No, they're going to suck. They're going to suck. Drew Lock is their quarterback. They might win 6 games, or they might even win 7 or somehow figure out how to win.
They do have a run game, though. Kenneth Walker III is a damn good back. And they had Penny at the end of the year rumbling.
Right, but
So
Drew Lock is still their quarterback, and I
yeah,
just can't. I can't buy Seattle stock, and Pete is he doesn't have Russell Wilson anymore. Like he doesn't have like, so there's an element of it could just become a dumpster fire. It could be an absolute disaster, and they still have weapons and all this stuff. And their draft, I think, was more reasonable than they're expected to, but I just don't think they're a threat right now. And if they get Jimmy, you're not going to like laugh them off. Like Jimmy, for as mediocre generally as I believe Jimmy to be, like he's decent. He's decent, and he can run an NFL offense, and he can deliver a ball on time, and also just sort of exudes confidence. If you go into Seattle locker room that's watching Drew Lock versus Geno Smith every day, and you bring in Jimmy, he's going to look like Tom Brady. So there's an element of like if Jimmy were to go to Seattle, you'd have to take Seattle a little seriously. And if you're the 49ers, and that is sort of an option on the table, you have to think, we can afford to pay him $25 million. Let's see, maybe somebody has an injury or part of the way through the year, we can trade him, and just keep him on the roster, because as uncomfortable as that is, we're fine with being uncomfortable. We thrive in uncomfortable situations because Kyle Shanahan's a sicko, and Kyle just doesn't care. Kyle's stubborn as they come, and I think they're willing to sit in that if the alternative is Jimmy going to Seattle and giving them some issues.
Do you still look at Carolina as the most viable alternative? Because they did draft Matt Corral. They do have Sam Darnold.
Right.
And I think PJ Walker might be their other quarterback. But I mean, Sam, I can't picture the Niners now that they've drafted Brock Purdy wanting Sam Darnold, or
No.
even in any kind of a renegotiated deal. They definitely don't want him at $18 million. Do you still look
Right.
at Carolina as the front runner? I might look at like somebody like Houston, who has Davis Mills, but not a lot else, and they drafted Jimmy
Right.
as maybe the most likely landing spot. But what do I know at this point?
Yeah, I think Carolina it's something where I think Corral is a guy that what do you even expect out of him year one? It's tough to like, and I think we're at the point where Rule is sort of betting his career on this season, and is he going to bet it on Sam Darnold? I don't think he wants to. And Corral, I think, would be the future, but I don't think that prohibits them from going after somebody like Jimmy. The main issue is dealing with Darnold and his money. I don't know how you sort that out. Because Darnold has to go somewhere, and he's making 20 plus million, and Jimmy's making 20 plus million. So figuring that situation out is the most complicated thing, because if Darnold was making a little bit less or Jimmy was making a little bit less, I think it'd be easier to figure it out. But I just don't know how they sort of figure that out. And in Houston, I think they like Davis Mills. I think he played solid for them last year. Now,
Yeah, he was good.
If he has a sophomore slump and they feel like their roster is more competitive than they expected, you've got Caserio, who used to be in New England. So there's an element of, hey, if we have a somewhat competitive roster and, maybe Davis Mills is more project than we thought, hey, maybe we bring in Jimmy. But it's just, I don't know. I don't know if there's a team out there right now. I think the 49ers are sort of saying, we can't even trade him right now anyway. Let's see if somebody has an injury crisis or gets really desperate, and we'll see what happens. But, we're not trading him now because we can't even.
Couple last moments with Jake Hutchinson from KNBR.com, who's, as you can tell, if you're in this audience right now, is dialed in on the Niners. And this is a guy you should be reading every single day, especially during football season on 49er football, because he knows it. He covers it as well as almost anybody on the beat. Let's talk about Trey Lance. You were at the Warrior game last night. Trey Lance was at the Warrior game last night. I believe it was his birthday last night. He's still one of the youngest quarterbacks in the NFL, and he hasn't played. I mean, he played one game at Central Arkansas, and then he played, a couple games last year. In his final year, he played that one game because of the pandemic, and so he hasn't played a lot of football. We all know that. And there's been all this talk about Rich Scangarello's comments about Trey and how do the Niners actually feel about Trey. I've heard people suggest that Brock Purdy is the Kirk Cousins to Trey being, RG3. I don't know how to read the Brock Purdy pick other than he's a cheap player who they can, who doesn't need a lot of coaching, who's really pretty polished and refined, and at least you have a very cheap quarterback room if you go with Lance, Sudfeld, and Purdy. But give me your thoughts on Trey Lance and his development, and let's try to cut through all the speculation and get right down to it. How do you think they feel about Trey? Are they do you think they're disappointed in Trey, as some of the reports indicate? Is he right on schedule, as I would think? To me, I don't think they're disappointed. I think, Colin Cowherd is like, they need to get him out there. Like it was like they've waited 5 years. Hey, Colin, this is year 2. They drafted this guy. He was the rawest, youngest quarterback in the entire draft, and he's arguably entering into the NFL's most complex offensive system. To me, the redshirt year was a given from day one. I never expected him to play even as much as he did this year. Give me your read on where Trey is and where the Niners are with Trey.
So this reminds me of like when I got into like English Premier League soccer for the first time, and I was just taken aback by how every day it's like, this coach needs to get fired. Like the turnaround is so quick, the fury is so intense, and I think some of that has happened in American sports too, where there's just there's just a sense of like everything has to happen now. We don't have any patience, and I think technology and Twitter and all this stuff has had a major component. I think the 49ers, like, they're not online. Like, they're not subscribing to all this stuff and talking heads. Like, Shanahan goes about his business, and they have a plan, and they sort of stick to it, and they don't really care. And their plan was see where Trey was at, and I think they saw a lot of things they liked, and they considered starting him at one point in training camp. The thoughts were there, and you saw Shanahan getting excited when he came out firing, and then you saw all the inexperience, and they're like, all right, he's not quite ready. Let's go with Jimmy. We still have Jimmy. Like, we don't need to trade him right now, and Trey can learn. And I know a lot of people knock on, can you really learn without playing? I think you can, especially from someone like Jimmy, who's just a professional. Like, he's just a reliable guy day in and day out. You can learn a lot just about habits and how to prepare as a professional and the day-to-day of it. And it's not as sexy as being out on the field, but Trey was practicing, and they gave him a lot of reps as the scout team QB. And that's all to say, I think they're happy with Trey. I think they are leaving the door open a little bit, where if he has a horrible camp or horrible OTAs or something, or he gets hurt, they still have Jimmy. And so I think they're taking it as, we're happy with Trey, but like, there's no reason to make a choice at this point with no offers on the table to get rid of Jimmy. And so I think people are misinterpreting that as they don't trust Trey. No, they're being cautious. They're being cautious because they don't have any other options or offers out on the table. So, hey, let's make sure that we have a backup plan in case of emergency or in case of injury. And I think they fully expect Trey will have an outstanding camp, that'll have a better grasp of the offense. And yeah, there's still going to be moments. There's still going to be shaky moments. He's still, 22, 23 years old. He's going to have a lot to learn. But I think at this point, they're preparing for the season like Trey's going to be the starter, like he's going to take over the job. And ideally, they would hope he runs away with it. And, if Jimmy's still around, it can be awkward. But I think they expect Trey to win the job and to look a lot more, resolved or improved than last season. And I don't think they have too many doubts. I don't think Kyle would have spent as much as he did to get Trey. I don't think they would have openly been trying to trade Jimmy, which, again, Jimmy would be traded if, he didn't have the shoulder surgery, and they tried to get that done. They wanted to move on from him. They've explicitly said that there was an offer on the table, and they thought they were going to get a deal done. And then he went and got shoulder surgery, and they weren't too stoked about that. So where I'm coming from and the way I see it is, it's Trey's job to lose, but they have no reason at this point to just outright cut Jimmy. He is, a very expensive safety valve for them right now, but I think they're willing to hold on to that for as long as they need to until someone offers them something, or if, they know Seattle won't pick him up off the wire.
Purdy, Is he something? Is he nothing? At first I thought, yeah, kind of underwhelming. Then I watched his film. I heard people compare him to Nick Mullins. He's got a better arm than Nick Mullins for sure. And he's a little bit thicker. The scouting report was, hey, this guy plays with a linebacker-like mentality. If there's a weakness in his game, he holds the ball a little too long. He takes some unnecessary hits. But he played a lot of football, and he's played successful football in the Big 12 for Iowa State. What do you think? Is Purdy something, nothing, not sure? Where are you with Purdy?
Well, they needed another arm anyway, right, for training camp. So it was a matter of, are they going to get it with an undrafted free agent, or are they just going to use, the last pick? So it's something where I think they saw a lot of qualities. Shanahan loves processing. He loves seeing where guys' eyes go with the ball, how they read the field. And with Purdy, you saw him, he made some pretty bad decisions at some point, because every college player does. But he has great footwork. He lines up. Like he generally reads the field pretty well. He's got a little bit of athleticism. And I think it's just a guy where, they were going to try and get him as an undrafted free agent. So they spent the last pick on him because, again, they needed another camp arm. They probably see some potential there where, hey, he could be like a little mini Colt McCoy like backup, best case scenario. Worst case, we stick him on the practice squad and he's our basically de facto third quarterback. So I don't think he's nothing, maybe a little less than something. But I think he's a guy that they're happy to have around, and they see a little bit of potential where, hey, maybe he could be our long-term backup and fit in this scheme long-term. But I don't really see him as a threat to Trey Lance's job security.
When you said Colt McCoy, Niner fans everywhere, Jake, got 85% last year against the Niners. Brash Cat on the text line says at the Krueg show, he says, I must say, Larry, you yourself have a good eye for talent. Your guests continually have excellent takes. Where are you finding all these guys?
Appreciate that.
Well, I'll say this. You do sports talk radio for as long as I've been doing it. Who's great, who's who sucks, and I will only bring great people on this show because you, the audience, deserve it. And I know who the great people are. And Jake is one of them, and his knowledge, as you can tell, is outstanding. So I'm glad to have him with us. All right, let me just do one last thing, and then we have one last question before we say goodbye. Let's pay the sponsors. If you're an orthopedic surgeon, an occupational therapist, a chiropractor, or a physical therapist, Telmetrics.co is for you. Telmetrics.co is designed to use in your practice and will greatly benefit your patients. You say, what is Telmetrics? Well, Telmetrics uses computer vision and artificial intelligence and provides a platform for outpatient rehab therapy services, both in the clinical and telehealth environments. Using Telmetrics can improve your patient's experience and much more. So for all your sports injury needs, or if you're a physical rehabilitation specialist of any kind, be sure that you go to Telmetrics.co, Telmetrics.co. And thanks to Casey Bateman and all the good people at Telmetrics for being a proud sponsor of the Krueg Show. And also Dan Coach Emilio. He's a retirement planning specialist. Check him out at securemoney.com on the web, or give Danny a call, 925-628-9966. He's a good friend. He's a retirement planning specialist. He's got 25 years of experience in the business. He's a lifelong Giants, Niner, and Warrior fan, and he can help you get an immediate 10% premium bonus on your principal retirement account. So call that number. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a deal. He'll sit down with you, come up with strategy to get you where you want to go. And as I said, his strategy can be different for different portfolios. But give him a call. He's fantastic. He's a great guy. 925-628-9966. And thanks to Danny and all the people at securemoney.com for being proud sponsors of the Krueg Show. All right, let's finish with the running backs. Ty Davis Price was the draft pick. That was the one that a lot of people said, man, I want them to go free safety there. Instead, they went running back. I viewed it as a statement to Deebo, like, hey, you know what? We're going to get another dynamic guy that we can run between the tackles because we don't necessarily want to use you in that capacity. And then, interesting, they got Jordan Mason out of Georgia Tech after the draft. They working out Calvin Turner, who Brian Primetime Smith has told me, man, Calvin Turner from Hawaii is like one of my favorite players. He's a big Hawaii fan. Turner was like kind of a Deebo, a running back, wide receiver. I don't even know that they signed Turner, but Jordan Mason's interesting from G Tech, and obviously Ty Davis Price. The Niners, I was looking at the numbers. Elijah Mitchell and Trey Sermon average about 2 yards a carry, Jake, between the tackles. So they need a runner between the tackles. So that guy's got to be 220 or more. Give me your thoughts on Ty Davis Price and how that impacts how they'll utilize Deebo.
Yeah, so it's something where, spending back-to-back third-round picks on running backs is not ideal. I don't think anyone's going to suggest that's a good thing. I think that's objectively bad, right? You don't want to spend those many assets. You don't want to every single year just be swinging on running backs that early. But at least the 49ers seem to understand that Trey Sermon is not what they hoped. And, yeah, they spent too much on him, and they should be criticized for that. But they seem to understand that he's either not in the picture or they don't expect a lot out of it. And so Ty Davis Price, I think it was too early. I think he was a guy that understandably was projected to go a little later, and they could have possibly traded back, gotten a few picks. I think Nick Cross from Maryland was a safety there who a lot of people liked, has the right athleticism, good coverage skills. I think that might have been a better pick. But at the same time, you watch Ty Davis Price and you see a little bit of Lenny Fournette. And a lot of that, it's obviously he's another LSU guy, but you see he's in that sort of bigger back mold. But he has speed that a lot of bigger backs don't have, and he has the quickness off the line. And with the outside zone scheme, it's not about just burner speed down the field. It's not about what's your 40 time. It's about that 10-yard split. How fast do you cut through a hole? And the issue I have with him is that he doesn't have that sort of elite sort of escapability. He's not pulling out juke moves or spin moves or all that stuff where you'd say, okay, that guy can hit a home run every single time, right? But at the same time, he is a little bit of elusive behind the backfield, getting to the line and making sure there's a hole to run through. And the amount of times I saw him just lay out a linebacker or a safety, just lower the shoulder and get after them and really just deliver blows, that's really encouraging. And I think they do need a guy like that who's built more physically, who has that physicality to take more of an every down, back sort of role and run more inside zone, run through linebackers. And a lot of teams don't invest at the linebacker position as much as they should. And I think Ty Davis Price is a guy that, like Mitchell, you saw how injured he got. You saw how much they had to lean on Deebo. And I think he's a guy that they expect, maybe it was early, but they think he can take a lot of the load off them and be a really physical and also quick guy to just attack between the tackles, like you said.
Who's the number one back? And are you convinced that Sermon is a bust, or do you think he just had a rough first year? Because, here's the thing about that, Jake, because, we had Lynch on after the Seattle game, and I said to him, hey, John, I think Trey looked really, really good. Trey Sermon looked really, really good in this game. And he's like, I agree. I thought he was slashed. I thought he looked explosive. He looked quick to the line. I thought that was Trey's best game. We never saw him again after that Seattle game. And it makes me wonder if there was a little bit of a disconnect between Bobby Turner and the front office, or if Sermon just doesn't hit the hole hard enough for a Bobby Turner type running back. But Turner's moved on, at least for this year, to other things. And I loved Sermon at Oklahoma. I thought he was great with the Buckeyes. I saw him rumble for 300 yards in college. Yep. I'm not convinced he's a bust. I think he's going to show up this year and be a factor. Where are you with Sermon? You seem to think that maybe his story's been written, huh?
I don't know if he's an out-and-out bust, but I don't think they'd invest as much as they did in Ty Davis Price if they were sold on him.
Yeah,
that said, I do wonder if the evolution, if they maybe run a little zone read, and he's a guy that has some familiarity in that. And I wonder if he's a receiving option, if he's more of the receiving back. Maybe he, takes I like JaMycal Hasty, but I don't like him as a third down back. He's just so tiny, and they've had issues finding him the ball. So I would like to see what Sermon does. And with Anthony Lynn, maybe he gets another go. We don't know what the deal was, but somebody in that building that was in a position of power didn't like what they saw from him. And I don't know if it was off the field or what the issue was. We don't know. But there's still time. It's still just his second year. He's still on the roster. They take 4 running backs. So they're usually they take 4 running backs. So he has a chance. And especially if he can show himself as a receiving back. Ty Davis-Price didn't show too much of that. Mitchell, I think, showed a little bit, but is still more of that speedy outside zone back. So I wonder if Sermon can make a spot, maybe, as a third down back. That requires a lot of trust, and they put a lot on your shoulders. But I think he's probably got the best receiving potential out of that group. And I loved what I saw from him in college. He did so much. So it was bizarre to see him just completely flame out and, not do much, but he has a chance.
Yeah. Eric Sully says, I remember his first carry this year. He got flipped upside down and fumbled.
Yeah, I think he got knocked
but I have
out,
high hopes for Trey. Yeah, he got knocked out. But man, he looked like an exciting slasher late in the year, or when I saw him against Seattle. We never really saw him after that. I'm eager to see him this summer. We'll see. Maybe he's a little quicker. Maybe he's a little better shape. Maybe his tentativeness and his ability, his want to dance at the line a little bit, maybe it was predicated on didn't know the offense, was thinking a little bit too much instead of just reacting and going. Maybe in year 2 he'll be better. I'm eager to see him. We should tell everybody, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Be extra sure to hit that notification bell so you can catch all the upcoming Krueg shows. I'm loving the YouTube show. I'm having a lot of fun. Thanks for supporting my channel, the Krueg Show. Thanks to Len. Thanks to Ryan, our behind-the-scenes guys. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks to Jake. Thanks to all of you in the chat. Loving the chat. Loving the donations when we get them as well. And it's been incredible. It's been absolutely incredible. Jake, we'll finish with you. What do you got coming up? For on KNBR.com. I know you're not just pigeonholed as just a Niner guy. You're covering all the sports all year round. But what do you got up? What are you writing about? What's the next thing on your to-do list? What story are you chasing down right now?
Yeah, so I'm looking at all the Niners rookies, doing some research. Appreciate the kind comments, folks. So obviously looking at those guys, trying to think big picture, how they're going to build out the roster, and then I'm obviously covering Dubs. That stuff's been fun. Ugly game that they pulled out, but it's fun when Steph does stuff like that to write about it. So yeah, I'm on a little Warriors duty sort of for now, and looking big picture on Niners, and it'll be interesting once this summer plays out a little bit more and get to see all these guys in action.
Oh, no doubt. What's your thought on the Warriors? Are they going to go all the way, or are they going to be derailed before? That doesn't sound like they're going to have GP2 at all. Even unless they get to the finals and he has some miraculous recovery. What a dirty play that was by Brooks. But it looks like Golden State's moving on from Memphis, even though last night was a rock fight. They still got the win. I can't see it coming back to Golden State. I think they finish it in Memphis. But where are you as far as the Warriors and winning a title and having a parade?
Yeah, I think I was a little concerned about it in terms of the way the physicality was going in the first 2 games. And I even saw it the last game where without GP2, Steph's got so much on his shoulders. You see his tired legs, like Clay too. I think that's why they've struggled shooting. Whoever just said Kuminga, I was calling for Kuminga to get out there in the start of the fourth quarter. It was kind of driving me crazy. I felt like they needed a spark. But I think the fact that they don't have GP2 puts a little bit defensively on Steph and Clay, where, man, they've got a lot of mileage. It's a lot for them because Poole can't play defense. So Steph has a lot on his shoulders on both ends. So it's exhausting. And I think you see their legs aren't quite there. And that's why I think, in addition to Memphis playing really good defense, they're struggling a little bit. So I think I was a little worried about that physicality wearing them down going into the Suns series. But I don't know, man. If they can get it to click just a couple of games, they've got the knack, man. They grind it out when it matters, even when it's ugly. So I would tentatively put my money on them going to the finals. I think they've got a really good chance to win it, even without GP2. I think they could use a little Kuminga. I think having Andre back, even for a few minutes here and there, defensively would help a ton. But I would not be stunned if they win it all this year.
All right, that's going to do it for us today. Great live stream. I really enjoyed it. Jake, man, you're the man. And we're closing in on, we've been doing this for about 4 to 6 weeks. We're closing in today on 4,000 subscribers. So I think we're like 10 away. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, go to YouTube and subscribe. Get us over 4,000 by the end of today. Jake, awesome stuff, man. We will hopefully see you this summer at camp. Nobody covers this team any better than you. Keep it rolling, my man. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, appreciate it as always, Larry. Great to be on.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Careful, you gon' get exactly what you asked for. Here for whatever you bring me, getting handled. I answer to no one, I don't need to hassle. Yeah, we ain't never fall back. Hold our ground.